passage of the stablecoin legislation drafted by the Senate, dubbed the Genius Act.
Because analysts say a wave of competition could complicate things.
Stablecoin issuer debut right here at the NASDAQ today.
Welcome to CEO Beat from Stable Pulse. This is Bam Azizi. Today, we are joined by Henry Stern, co-founder of Privy. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited for this episode. Henry and I, we go way back, and we work together for many years, and excited to learn more and share some of those learning with the founders and audience that are listening today to today's show. But let's go back a little bit to your childhood. I would love to hear your background and the founder journey. If you don't mind, share some of the early achievements in your life, and then how did you end up in US and doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I can try. So I grew up in France for the most part until I was in middle school, and basically moved to the US. Then I think my parents were both lucky enough to work jobs that enabled them to work from the US, and I think very rightfully so. They were like, man, these children need to speak English if they're going to have a shot at building careers in the global workspace and global workforce. And so I think actually, oddly enough, I kind of lucked into many successions of being lucky with timing. In this case, my parents were very lucky in bringing us to the US when I was a teenager. And so basically I went through end of middle school, high school, and then college in the US. And so even though my whole extended family's in France, and that's where I grew up, that's where I feel, in many ways most at home. Professionally, I became very American. And likewise, I think through college, I had these very exciting dreams growing up of becoming a lawyer or a banker, or all of these things that like kids typically don't say, this is what I want to be. And I think through college, I started just seeing more and more on computers. I think I saw, this is very geeky, and I don't know that I've shared this, but like I saw The Social Network, which had an impact of me on like, man, software will eat the world, in fact. And no matter what I want to do, if I don't know how to speak to computers, then I will not be able to sort of be as highly leveraged as I'd like as a professional, regardless of profession. So I think that was the second lucky break. Is I started my college at Stanford. I transferred to Columbia, and it was a smaller computer science department where I really felt like I could build a lot of connections with professors and with folks in the department. And so I ended up doing computer science, which was very lucky. And I remember at the time, what I liked most about computers was determinism, which is to say, if you're doing something and the compiler doesn't compile, then it's your fault. You haven't understood the rules of the game. And unfortunately, we've moved to an era of non-determinism. So I guess my entire life plan has been foiled by AI now, where we're now in a non-deterministic computation era. But that's initially how I got into computers. Started a company out of college with a really good friend of mine. Went through YC. It didn't work. And then I went back to grad school, and then I ended up studying cryptography and computer security. And that's how I got into crypto, which led me here.
Nice. That's great. So the fact that you didn't drop out of college, that's your French part. That's the immigrant mindset. You either need a PhD or a doctor or lawyer. I'm sure your mom is proud of you now that you didn't drop out.
Well, she still doesn't understand what crypto is, so I had to go and build Privy because of it. But otherwise, I think you're right. I'm very, very conformist in that standpoint.
Yes. So did you feel like you're always entrepreneurial? Like you mentioned Social Network. When I watched that movie, it was a dilemma for me. Should I be a scientist or should I go and run a business? Both are as exciting. But did you feel like you're more on the entrepreneurial side and you want to build a business, or you were more of a nerd that you want to kind of break codes and build things in the academia world?
I think very much the latter. I would say two things happened, which is one, I followed this friend of mine, and this friend of mine has since gone on to build a company called Ro, which is a direct-to-consumer healthcare company that's very successful. And he was extraordinarily entrepreneurial minded, and we just wanted to work together. And so I think coming out of undergrad, I kind of stumbled into it and followed him. I remember we went to Columbia had office hours with YC partners, and we had office hours with Sam Altman, who was a YC partner at the time. And he was like, "You guys are great. Your idea sucks, but you should come in and visit." And I was like, "This is awesome. Like, what the hell is Y Combinator? Like, is their office Midtown or downtown New York? Like, where are we going?" And then we ended up on a flight that same night to go to SF to pitch, Paul Graham and the entire partnership. But I really stumbled into that part of the world that wasn't at all something that was in my sort of reference field of things that someone could do. And then I think starting that first company, which was called Shout, I was kind of blown away by the fact that investors gave us money, by the fact that people took us seriously. I mean, we worked our asses off and we made so many mistakes. The company ended up, shutting down after, we found product market fit for a few months right there. And then we never got it back. And we lived in hard search of that feeling again. But I think the fact that people took us so seriously, and the fact that it felt like we were doing something that wouldn't happen without us, ended up being the thing that really drove me to continuing to try to do this, which is I want to wake up and know that if I weren't doing what I'm doing, it wouldn't happen. And that's kind of, the things that have driven me. And then obviously I think there's a lot of value we can build into the world via digital assets, stablecoins, crypto.
Would you think you would be able to do the same thing in France or any other part of the US if you were not in Silicon Valley?
I mean, I live in New York, so ostensibly, yes. I don't know how many other cities there are, but I think Silicon Valley is really special. And whenever I go out west, there's kind of a sense of the pioneer spirit. You stand in the Presidio and you look over, and I think you can kind of imagine people coming in during the gold rush. In fact, some of my mom's family came. My grandpa's grandpa was born in San Francisco during the gold rush because his family came over at that point. And so there's something I think really special to this idea of we can invent the future that I don't think exists anywhere else. And there's a ton I adore about France, but venture capital in France is called risk capital. Like the idea of failing is just very different. And so I think there is something special here to the US and to this part of the US in particular that uniquely enables the sort of work that I'm doing, at least.
Yeah, there is a willingness to take more risk here in the US than compared to other part of the world.
Sometimes to a fault, right? We lionize failure. We say, keep at it, even if you're completely grinding your head against a wall. So like there's pros and cons to everything, but it's certainly very special.
That's true. As they say, success is going from one failure to another without losing enthusiasm, right? So I think that's the mantra for US. Like they keep betting, and maybe they have like 8 failures, but 2 out of 10 becomes like the next Meta, next OpenAI. That's I really stumble upon on your background, your story, because it's very, very similar to what I did. So like you, I have a PhD in computer science. I applied.
I don't. I did in fact not pursue the PhD route. So you're much farther along than I am. But
you applied for YC. I did. Sam Altman interviewed me. I didn't get in. You got in, so that's good. And then my first company was an identity, was no password. So that's where I got connected to PKI, public key infrastructure and cryptography. And then Bitcoin, like around 2016, 17, it was a bullish year, and then everybody was talking about Bitcoin. And it was exciting for a lot of people from investment perspective. And then I've heard blockchain, and I started digging deeper, tried to break it. I got very, very excited about like how this decentralized technology works. I was more into the technology than the Bitcoin as an investment asset. And then that's how I got connected. And then I started Mesh. As it seems like you went through the similar journey. And then how did you end up building Privy? Like what was the goal from day one?
I think I came out, so I ended up after my master's, was going to join a PhD program, and ended up thinking, man, these are years where I want to be building things. And so let me try and do research somewhere, but in industry. And I ended up joining an awesome company called Protocol Labs, where I worked on a layer 1 blockchain called Filecoin for a number of years. And I came out of that thinking these rails are so powerful. We have built a system through which disparate economic entities can reason about state and reason about the world together without having to coordinate ahead of time. So this is really ownership rails for the web. Unfortunately, the developer experience is like horrible. And it is so hard to build anything on these chains. And more or less, there's an assumption that like your user has to be religiously convicted about crypto if they're ever going to touch your product, because your product is so goddamn bad. And I was like, this is part of why you kind of get this real draw to only certain use cases, typically very highly speculative use cases. And I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it is only a subset of what you can build on these rails. And the reason why they have been the most popular is, I think, because the UX was so poor that you needed a real carrot to convince people to go through the experience of, setting up a wallet, getting a mnemonic.
It's a
and so it was like,
process.
You will make a lot of money if you get through this absolute pain. And unfortunately, I think like there's a wide range of products that if we can lower the friction, we can then widen the aperture of what can find product market fit. And so I think that was the core idea was, I don't want to work in this space anymore. The products are too bad and people aren't building for users enough. And then kind of coming back to it of, wait, what if we could make it easier for folks to do this? What if we could associate real people to wallets in a way that enables developers to focus on the users rather than, get stuck in the public key cryptography of it all? And so can we take basically the infrastructure that allows anyone to get a wallet, no matter how conversant they are or not in crypto? And can we enable developers to build on top of crypto directly in their products without needing to be experts up front? And so that's kind of how we got started on the path to Privy. I met my co-founder Asta through a mutual friend, and we immediately decided we should be working together. This is too exciting, meeting broadly, and so we should do this together. And then years of pain followed.
Is there any? Did you pivot at all, or it was just from the get-go that like what you have in Preview was on your mind, or you went through iterations and evolving through the years?
No, we evolved and we pivoted. We started the very end of 2021, and at the time the sort of idea maze was the same, and so we've been working in the same space the entire time. But the idea was, how do we associate real users to wallets in order to enable better experiences? And so the first version of Privy was a like privacy preserving data store, kind of a Redis of sorts that encrypted user data so you could associate it to wallets without taking on that user's data. And basically what we saw was this was not a successful product. It was horribly hard to sell. It was like pulling teeth. And so we're like, well, fuck, like people really don't want to use this. But also the few people who did, just out of the kindness of their hearts, were using it to build some version of like poor man's account abstraction. They were basically using Privy V1 in a sense to store private keys associated to wallets so they could automate certain transactions and certain behaviors on behalf of users. So we had half of our tiny user base at the time using it to associate email and phone numbers. And I think this was solving the issue of how do we authenticate and how do we identify users connecting and transacting on our app. And the other half were like storing private keys in order to try and like make some of the work transacting on chain simpler. So that kind of gave us the roadmap for what ended up being our V2. So about, we launched a product in January of 2022 or so. By July, it was very, very clear we needed to change something. And we relaunched it in September of 22 as at first an authentication. Sorry?
Best timing.
Yeah, great timing. I mean, and I actually think it was, so to your point, somewhere in the middle there, the market completely blew up with FTX and with everything else. And so there was a real come to Jesus moment of like, do we want to be here? Like, is this what we should be doing? My co-founder Asta is much more talented and employable than I am, and was coming from self-driving cars and AI. And so it was much harder for her, I'm sure, being like, what the fuck am I doing with this deadbeat, trying to work in crypto. But we both had a lot of conviction of if we can make these products easier to build, the amounts of things that you can build with digital assets, we didn't have words for stablecoins at the time for crypto, is really, really expansive. And I think we got lucky in that basically we were very, very small at the time. And so we got to grow with the market as it rebirthed, rather than being a really big player who got then hit by the FTX blowup. So I think a lot of the incumbents prior to us basically just had to deal with having really high valuations, running complex businesses in a market where the bottom fell out from under you. And instead we got to be there, like spring children, coming of age with this market and growing with this market. And so in that sense, even though we didn't know it at the time, the timing was very good.
I agreed. You mentioned that you built this because your mom doesn't know anything about crypto. So where the friction is usually come from? Is it the wallet? Is it the identity? Is the seed phrase? Is the user experience, or all the above? Like what's the answer?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and this is where, to be honest, there's a piece of writing that I really love called On Market Annealing. And I might misspeak, but I think it was written by Martin Casado at A16Z about like getting to, call it 10 million ARR in very early stage markets. And it speaks to the fact that like product market fit in a nascent emergent market is a bad term because there's no market to fit the product to. The best you can try and do, and the very powerful thing you can try and do, is anneal the market and the product, meaning you heat them at the same temperature so you can evolve the market with your product. And I think that is kind of what we saw, which is when we started, the idea of logging into dApp with an email was insane. The idea that anybody outside of crypto would want to use crypto rails was insane. And so it was very hard to convince people of that. But the friction was twofold. It was threefold. It was one, the act of downloading an app, a third-party extension, having to basically have a multi-product experiences. At each of the most important steps of the user experience, the developer building on crypto rails had to basically kick their users out and say, please go elsewhere to do this really important thing. I'll see you later, maybe. And so that just completely crushed conversion and user flows. And so dApps were, as a result, often very poor and extremely financial in nature because you didn't have long-lived states. The second point of friction was the actual act of setting up the wallet. You know, you had to store the mnemonic, you had to go through all sorts of things, set a password. Typically, you try to, tap through it really quickly, and then the wallet became valuable, and you'd forgotten everything that you'd store. You obviously hadn't saved your seed phrase, and so on and so forth. And then I think the third was you kept getting reminded that you were in this weird product state everywhere in the product experience. So every transaction is yet another distraction taking you away from the app experience. It's kind of like being in a really good movie, and your neighbor in the theater keeps coughing or something at all the best parts. And so I think beneath all of this was sort of the core friction, which was this belief that in order to use crypto, you had to want to use crypto, as opposed to treating it like an extremely powerful rail, an extremely sort of, I think, morally valent rail, but one that can exist in the fabric of the products that serve it rather than being the main show itself.
Makes sense. And what was the initial use case and how this use case evolved? Like what type of companies are using Privy in the V1 and now like who are using Privy now?
Yeah, actually, we have an old strategy doc. We worked with this really talented person called Ben Beish, who had helped us think through this. And the goal at the time was to say there's probably like three markets in crypto. There's call it circa 2022. There's the hardcore crypto natives who will never use a third-party platform for these things and basically for whom the market is currently built. There is a small but growing, we believe, category of crypto developers who want to widen their TAM and address a currently non-existent market, which is people who are excited about experiences to be built on crypto rails, even if they're not already using crypto. And then I think the third was, and there will increasingly be folks who have nothing to do with crypto who want to leverage the rails because the rails are really good at certain things. And like at the time, we're like, that market, doesn't exist. It's a dream. And so like, we'll come back to it. But clearly the only place where we have something really concrete and valuable to deliver is in the second market. Who are the crypto developers who want to appeal to a non-crypto audience? So that was our initial market. It was basically people who wanted to build better games, who wanted to build better social apps, who wanted to build so on. And we got very lucky. We served a customer called Friendtech somewhat early on that completely blew up. And so scaled our product massively. Our product was well built, and so it managed to scale with this app. And basically, very quickly, we saw, we can grow here, and then we can grow into DeFi, and then increasingly we can grow into stablecoins. And what has materialized over time is that today our audience is really split between, on the one side, very crypto native audiences. So we serve the folks from Hyperliquid, folks like Jupiter or Uniswap, or a lot of these applications that are very crypto native, but they are building some of the fundamental infrastructure in the space. And likewise, we serve really amazing customers like Ramp or like Deal or like Klarna. And these are apps that benefit from crypto as another rails, but aren't fundamentally crypto apps per se. And I think today that's what we found very, very powerful, is serving both sides of the market so we can deliver better abstractions for people who aren't here to think about the RPC methods, the gas, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, deliver extremely powerful low-level infrastructure for the folks who know exactly what they're doing and how they want to do it. And we think there's a really virtuous loop basically serving both customer segments.
Makes sense. Do you think stablecoins, the market trend on that end, plus the regulatory clarity, like the Genius Act, opened the floodgate for crypto in general? And Privy, did you see any changes in terms of like value being stored? Was mostly Bitcoin and Ethereum, and Dogecoin now is more USDC, USD. Do you see those type of trends inside Privy?
We do. I mean, I think we've been very lucky, and I'm curious. I'll flip the question on you after, so get ready. But I'm very curious for what you're seeing. I think we are seeing basically a broad acceleration of the market that we serve, and a diversification of the market that we serve. I think concentration risk was always something that we thought a lot about with the users we were working with, and I think increasingly, like to your point, the share of stablecoins held on infrastructure is just much higher than it used to be. It used to be mostly non-stable assets, investment, trading, social, gaming, NFTs. And now there's an increasing segment of stable coins and other tokenized assets related to, real world markets and so on and so forth. So we're seeing a much broader diversification. We're seeing much bigger companies, enterprises come into the market with repeatable use cases. And then I think we're seeing development of a richer ecosystem to serve these customers. So a lot more integration surface for us to build for.
Yeah.
How about you? How have you seen things evolve with Mesh?
Yes, similar to what you said. Like I think there are two metrics or two main reasons for that. Is like when we started, 75%, 80% of the assets we were touching or we were like facilitating to the transfer. It was more on Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. Now more than 75, 80% is on the stablecoin side. And I think if you think about it from market perspective, when market went down 2022, everything was down, but the stablecoin was just going up and up and up. So that trend happened around the same time both of us started the company. And then the second part is basically the regulatory framework. The Genius Act opened the floodgate for a lot of traditional financial institutions coming to the market, and Genius Act kind of opened the door for a stablecoin. Clarity Act will open the door for a lot of other type of crypto assets, but I think that was kind of another impact that, or another reason that we are seeing more stablecoin than non-stablecoin assets, but the similar pattern.
And what are the biggest blockers that you're still seeing today? The biggest, 2 or 3 unlocks that if this happened, then the market on your side would be that much more extended. Also, I don't think you knew that you were coming on my podcast today. So
No, happy to answer. So I think the biggest block right now is still there is a lack of clarity. So we are all waiting on the Clarity Act. The situation that we have with the banking sector. But let's not forget that's only U.S., right? So the biggest block here is we have different jurisdiction, different countries are passing different type of laws. Being crypto is a global phenomenon. So as a stable coin. So dealing with all these fragmented regulatory framework, it's going to be very, very painful and challenging for a lot of businesses like Mesh, like Privy, like Stripe, because we're global companies. And I think we would like to see some sort of an, like similar to what happened to internet, right? Some sort of a standard, some sort of acceptable best practices and protocols globally for these companies to grow faster.
That makes a lot of sense. Super cool.
So let's move on to your vision. So you said what was your vision day one. Now you're part of a bigger company. I don't know like how much detail you can share or you want to share, but like as a founder, it's very interesting for a lot of founders to be in the position to somebody else buy the entire company. Was there any dilemma for you? Like, was Stripe, and be like in the hindsight, do you think that was the right move? And then I will get into the vision post acquisition. But whatever you can share, that would be super valuable for a lot of founders to learn from you.
Yeah. So I think we were. The short answer is I'm very grateful and excited that we've made the decisions we've made. I think it's been we're about 9 months into being a part of Stripe and Privy being a wholly owned subsidiary, and I think I'm really happy with where things are and the ways in which it's accelerated us. And so I think there's probably 3 things that stand out. But the first is the amount to which Privy as a company, as a product, has been accelerated, both in terms of product capacity, in terms of team capabilities and the things that we get to do on the ground, engineering leverage, tooling, infrastructure. There's just a lot that we're already shaping ourselves to be like Stripe and now get to do so in a much more direct way, which is super exciting. So that's turned out to be great. The second is, I think, in terms of, impact. We get to serve customers that we think we can really just change the world with. And this might sound a little bit like, goody two shoes, but part of it is man, we had 10-year roadmaps that are going to turn into 2-year roadmaps in ways that are really uniquely exciting, I think, and enabled by this. And then I think the third is the opportunity to hopefully help transform Stripe itself. And so coming into the conversation, the folks at Stripe came to us. They'd already bought a company called Bridge that does stablecoin orchestration and issuance, and they were like, we realized that wallets are an extremely important part of the stack and one that we want to be investing in and building with. And I was like, great, we can sell you some wallets. And they were like, no, but we'd like to consider, I think the way it was framed at the time was very nice. It was like, would you consider merging our 2 companies? And I was like, that's a super nice way to put whatever would be happening. But at the time, we were already doing a lot of work with Bridge, who we knew from just serving joint customers. And so I think that went a long way to reassuring us that, Stripe was very serious about this. And then just going into the early conversations, most of them, frankly, were about product and were about where the internet ought to go. And so it was very much a vision-driven, here is what we could do as part of Stripe and working much more closely with Stripe. And I think that kind of set the tone and the foundation for how we do this. And I would say Stripe's broader mission in the space is twofold. One, serve users in whatever ways are most efficient and best suited for them. And so we want to be able to serve users across any rail, whether that's PIX, SEPA, or USDC or whatever, right? The point is, if there's a rail that is a good fit for what the user needs, we, Stripe, should be there and should be able to be the best tool to enable that. And then I think the second is to actually build the core primitives that enable new businesses to get off the ground, building, to grow the GDP of the internet might be the Stripe meme. And I think you kind of see it in a few places here, both with across, merchants, developers, fintechs, but increasingly with agents and things like that. And so I think Stripe's view is these rails should be married so tightly together that we can inherit all of the things that are amazing and incredible about crypto, but we can also bring to them the things that work so well in the systems that we've built to date. And I think Privy's worldview was, how do we make it that you can build incredible new experiences without having to think about the underlying rails? So the two really meshed up extremely well, and from that standpoint, it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. It meshed up, pun intended. But it's funny that you mentioned increasing the GDP of internet. When you're opening a lot of these websites, especially on the crypto infra, they everyone is talking about the same thing. Like if you open Bridge website or Privy or Noah or BVNK, they're all they all want to set money free. I think you're the only one that is a little bit different, that you're focused more on the user experience, and also you want to enable in a sense for the world to come in chain without abstracting all the complexity, without owning the risk, owning the complexity, owning the technical challenges. So it's very, very unique. And then I think about it as very, very similar to what Stripe did for credit card processing, right? So it was very, very tough to process a payment. You had to manage tokens, you had to manage authentications, you had to have a secure server, you need to be compliant, you have to have licenses. They abstracted all of that complexity and gave you one line of code, and then you could accept credit card. And in a sense, it sounds like a very, very nice match. And considering that Stripe is also a tech company, you're not like just joining another financial institution. It's just another tech company. That would be an interesting match. And I could see that. What was the change after? I know that you're a wholly owned subsidiary. You still run Privy, but was there any change from vision, from product perspective, or you just have the freedom to do whatever you want to do?
No, it's a good question. Maybe I'll add one last thing. The name Y Combinator, I think, speaks to some version of a recursive function that accelerates like the slope of acceleration of a curve. I'm kind of butchering it, but the idea is broadly that. Yeah. And this is what I like about, building developer tooling. We get to build the underlying foundations that enable people to do their own thing. And so there's this dual layer, and actually Stripe has this much more than Privy, which is actually building the Rails, building the products, building, the account system and so on that enable folks to run on Stripe, but then giving them direct access to the underlying tooling so that they can build it themselves. And I find that to be really, really exciting. To answer your question, the Privy roadmap is really set by us. And so in that sense, one of the things that was very important to us coming in was we kind of had a few conditions. One of them was we need to be able to, obviously work together towards a better stack that Stripe can use that meshes, again, it really well. But we should be able to work with whoever's best for our user. And so if that's a bridge competitor, if that's a Stripe competitor, today you might say if that's a Tempo competitor, it doesn't matter. Whatever our customer needs to work really, really well with Privy, or frankly with any other part of the stack, so that each piece can be valuable on a standalone basis and can be the best tool for the customer, no matter what else they want to use. And so I think that was a very early part of the contract and agreement that we had in how we do this. And so we have a lot of freedom to run our roadmap. In fact, we set it entirely, and it's completely based on what our customers are asking us. That's been one way in which we have just continuously worked with Privy. We don't do much by way of partnerships, really just answer customer demands. Maybe what working within Stripe has given me, though, is a lot more appreciation for probably two things, which is one, the importance of being bimodal, the places in which fiat has good things to bring to the stack, and where actually being able to play both instruments is really, really valuable and really, really important. And two is the importance of considering these are both very vague in a sense, which maybe speaks to the lack of constraints that we've had. But two would be the ability to really build across different layers of abstraction. So all the way from here are UIs that you can use when you want to build a transaction with Privy. Here is a full kit that gives you just a React component that you can build with, all the way to this is the underlying raw, API request and so on, and just the importance of the flexibility of the underlying rail as you go from building for a certain type of customer to, the enterprise user to now tooling builders and so on. That's something that Stripe has so much experience with that we've learned a lot from.
Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit more about the space. Now we're hearing that a lot of companies are building new banks on top of blockchain. Erebor, Dakota, and many other companies that they're building. I've heard Athena is another one. We also have a lot of credit card, crypto-backed card companies like Cost, Pay. Seems like there is a big competition heating up on the consumer side. Do you think that would impact how the crypto works for the consumer? Do you think naturally this competition will make things easier? Because now we have many different stablecoins, many different tokens, different networks. How would you see that user experience evolve as we're seeing this competition heating up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I Well, I'm very happy that you named a number of Privy customers as part of that wind up. So we're very excited to see all of the work that's happening there. And frankly, I think we're headed towards very, very bright future for the end user and for the consumer for having so much option. I think what's happening is the competition in the space is going to give rise to both incredible like fintech super apps that are able to do what hasn't been seen in the West all that much in really exciting ways, and like pretty incredible specialization, especially as you can kind of get software on tap these days with AI. Now, I think there's a lot of caveats here around the security of the systems that you're building and so on. But the point is, it'll mean that you can get really the right product for you in a way that wouldn't have been possible before. So a lot easier to build really good fintech experiences on secure rails as we move forward. You're right that there's increased fragmentation, but I actually think that what we're seeing is a move towards a lot of these traditionally non-crypto companies to pick a stack and kind of stick to it. And so what I think we're going to see is an evolution of the underlying infrastructure to marry and kind of bridge these different infrastructure choices together. So for example, I'm friends with Sam Broner, who started the New Money company. They're building a stablecoin clearinghouse. And I think you'll start to see the emergence of, this is what Bridge does in many ways with orchestration. This is what you guys do with payments acceptance, as does Stripe. And this is part of the point of Privy with wallets and being able to do it cross-chain. We'll see infrastructure that basically allows the stack and the fragmentation to get married and whittled down so it doesn't impact the end user. And the user will kind of see actually the disappearance of all of these knobs and settings, even though the developer has access to them.
You think wallet would disappear? Like in a sense that we know wallets?
Yes and no. I think wallet in the sense that, well, actually, yes, no, and no. I'll give you three responses. I think wallets I think wallets in the MetaMask, Phantom, Rainbow sense of the word, is a really unique product shape that's uniquely well suited to a number of extremely important customers. And I don't think that's going away anytime. And so I think that'll remain. However, I think we'll see massive expansion of the market through wallets that live within products. And obviously I have a stake in this game, but I think embedded wallets basically are going to continue to grow. And in that sense, I think more people, and we're already seeing this, will use stablecoins than they know. And they'll be able to use it as part of this wallet construct that goes far beyond a typical crypto wallet without having to know about it. So I think basically, actually, there will be more things that kind of look like what we see crypto wallets as out in the world, but they won't look like the crypto wallets of today. Well, at Sessions last week, we unveiled this thing called digital asset accounts. And basically digital asset accounts is something that we've been building for a while at Privy. And this is a higher level abstraction on top of wallets, where you can have wallets that are multi-chain, that have multiple custody types. So they can be self-custodial, and they can have a custodian under the hood across the different chains that you're operating on, that can plug directly into orchestration rails, that can plug directly into bridging and swapping and earn and yield and so on and so forth. And so like all of these things will be packaged together so that this wallet becomes much more powerful than it used to be, but it remains a modular piece of infrastructure where you can plug the components that you want into it. That's awesome.
Super excited to put my hands on it and test it and use it as part of the Mesh stack. On the founding journey side, you're just kind of wrapping up the conversation. I would like to know, like, is there anything that you wish you knew when you started Privy that you would tell the younger version of yourself?
I don't know. I think the journey is a lot of it. I think maybe I have three things, which is this is probably more applicable to my 22-year-old self and the first time I started something. And that is like, get very good at triaging the areas you need to improve versus the areas you need to just find people who are better than you. I think earlier on in my career, I was really trying to push myself to be better at all the things I was really bad at, and there were many. And I kind of just got to the conclusion, man, this is a complete waste of time. Like, I will never be as good as, Bam on this specific thing. And so I just need to work with Bam rather than trying to like get there. And I think I got a lot more comfortable with, these are my deficiencies and I can know them and I can buttress them and I can build a team, hopefully, that will enable us to win together rather than treating like, a startup kind of like a prolonged like therapy session where I'm trying to be a better version of myself, which isn't the point at all. So that's probably one that I think, took me a decade to internalize, but I've gotten better at. And
easier
then I think
said than done.
easier said than done, for sure. And then I think the second is some version of we treated Privy like life or death at all times. And I don't regret doing that. I think we have been, really working like the entire company depends on it. And that's because it does. If we're not here to create value and impact every minute of every day, then there are much easier jobs that we could have and much easier ways to do things. And I think that intensity that Asta and I and the team brought has been such a defining part of how we work and the way in which we do. And so I'm really happy that this is how we do things. And I think there have been moments where I've heard that it was not sustainable and not how we should be doing things. And I respectfully disagree.
Yeah, makes sense. But these are great things that I'm sure a lot of younger founders and first-time founders would learn a lot from. So thanks for sharing that. As a closing question, I have two questions. One is like bigger question, one is a smaller question. The bigger question is where the industry is headed. What's your prediction? What's your contrarian view of the market? What's something that you're the only one saying it's going to be true, that everybody else is saying it's not going to be true? Anything that comes to mind from prediction perspective.
So I have two hot takes. Okay. The big debate, I think crypto is going to usher in a world of global companies in a way that we haven't seen before. I think it'll end up marrying with everything that's happening on the agentic side, though that may take longer than people think. But the two contrarian takes, one might be, I believe crypto rails will start to peak, meaning not peak P-E-A-K, but P-E-E-K. They will start to show through the interfaces a bit more. As we get comfortable with the medium, there are parts where you will start to see the underlying sort of rails. Like I went to Kenya last December, and I saw the Tether logo, USDT, on an airport billboard. And I just think there will start to be not just consumer recognition for certain stablecoins, but actually there are parts of, you don't think about TCP/IP when you're using the internet, but the word buffer is kind of part of the vernacular. And so I actually think we'll start to see some of the underlying technicals peek through in a way that's natural to users because the rails make a lot of sense. So that's my first contrarian take. It's a debate I have very often with people at Stripe. And then I think the second is that I hold out hope that Web3 will rise again and that there are non-financial applications for crypto, even though it'll take a very long time for them to develop.
Yeah, I totally understand. My second question is AI. How did AI change Privy? How did AI change you?
It's a great question. I mean, we're extremely careful with our uptake of AI in a way that we should probably be embarrassed about. But the reality is we build security software. And so we've been very early and hungry adopters of AI defensive software, integrated, always on pen testing, a number of suites that we integrate into our CI/CD pipeline and so on and so forth. But we've been a bit slower maybe than we ought to in developing basically AI code generation because of the way in which our stack works and is meant to work. But it has certainly changed, I think, some of the development practices at Privy and the way in which we interact with our own product. It's changed the product itself. Like at this point, we monitor every piece of documentation, every product surface to make sure that it's agent friendly, that it can be consumed in the way that developers tomorrow and today are building, which is to say not reading the docs, but feeding them through another intelligent being and asking it to whip something up. So it's changed our product expectations and our product sense and our product milestones really meaningfully. And then I think it's forced us to think about testing differently. Like the reality is sub-cent transactions become really important in an agentic world. Hundreds of thousands, millions of transactions a minute become something viable if you're imagining some version of streaming payments on a machine-to-machine world. And so we've actually been very hungry adopters of the early tooling, like, MPP and X402 and so on, because we think it can really push our product to be much better, very much in the same way as, the very crypto native parts of the industry help us scale the product for everyone else. So that's been a huge change for us, and I'm excited to see it keep happening. In fact, I think at this point, something like 35% of new signups for Privy as developers are people building agentic wallets. So we're just seeing a lot of acceleration there.
That's huge. So some quick random questions. Actually, one. What is a good restaurant that you're a big fan of in Paris and in New York?
Oh, man.
It better be vegetarian because I want to try it.
Tough. Actually, I do have good ones. They're man, they're both extremely bougie references, so I'm so sorry in advance. There's a very good restaurant in Paris at the corner. I forget which street, but I think it's Rue de Verneuil and something else called L'Arpège, Arpege. It's I think 3 Michelin star restaurant, which is why I say it's
went
bougie,
there.
but
I tried that. I confirm it's very good.
amazing. And the chef Alain Passard will come out and kind of like greet all the tables, and he's this extremely like charismatic guy who tends to hit on the ladies at the table, and so like a very fun experience of just like being around this larger than life
You're
individual.
vegetarian, right? Or pescatarian type of restaurant. They do fish.
They do fish, and now they've reintroduced meat, but for a long time they were only vegetarian. And then in New York, I actually think ABCV on 19th and Broadway or so is a very good vegan restaurant that makes some very good food.
That's great. For a French person, a lot of vegan restaurants, so that's very good.
I don't twist my arm.
Henry, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know you're very, very busy. To our audience, please remember to follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on, and stay tuned for more episodes of CEO Bit. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.